Beirut, Lebanon, summer 2017. Every week, ships arrive here with cattle and sheep. Further transport. These animals have been transported thousands of kilometers already. First, the journey to the harbor by road, then across the Mediterranean Sea by ship. Not all of the animals survive the stress. Some are dead, others are injured, just like this animal coming from Ukraine. Images like this should not exist if cattle come from the European Union, because in 2015, the European Court of Justice ruled that the well-being of animals who are exported live from the EU must be ensured for their entire journey. The judgment says, animal welfare does not end at the Union border.
And the
destinations are not the EU border. They are the country where the animals are unloaded for at least 48 hours. The countries that import are always countries like Egypt or Turkey or Iran, which do not hold EU standards. And the EU accepts that their control does not work there. A decision of the highest European Court of Justice is not being upheld. No, it is not, say European animal welfare associations. Their investigations reveal that as soon as animal transports leave the EU, animal welfare ends. They cannot accept this any longer. In Brussels in August 2017, 1 million protest signatures were collected by organizations throughout Europe in order to hand them over to the EU Commissioner responsible.
For the animals, I think if we could go have an evolution.
Associations from many European countries are united in the Eurogroup for Animal Welfare. They demand the implementation of the European Court of Justice judgment. A delegation of European organizations has met the EU Commissioner.
As we stand here, all these millions of animals are being transported across Europe, outside Europe. And the gain of today was that the Commissioner promised that because of this petition, he's able to keep this topic high on the European Union's agenda.
The animal rights activists are under no illusions. Some have witnessed the transportation of the animals and seen their final destination for themselves.
In our work, we have witnessed things beyond imagination of anyone. We have seen European animals being having their eyes stabbed, having their tendons slashed.
While transport conditions within the EU have steadily improved, for the animals arriving in many export destination countries, things have apparently not changed much. Curious looks are unwanted, for good reason. These hidden shots were also seen by the EU Commissioner.
We brought to his attention what is happening with European animals after they leave their European soil, being killed and transported in a way which would be illegal in the European Union. It's a thing that nobody can accept anymore.
We want to follow up cattle and sheep from Europe and want to know how far the judgment of the EU Court of Justice is being implemented on the ground. At a briefing of a team from the Animal Welfare Foundation, they're investigating live animal transportation. This week, in June 2017, calf transports. At the age of 2 weeks, calves are allowed to be transported. This truck is on its way from Eastern Europe to Spain, across Germany and France. Over 3,000 kilometers of road. Every 9 hours, the unweaned calves should be unloaded because
Calves cannot be cared for on the truck because the calves are still dependent on milk food, which means they would have to get electrolyte solution or milk replacer, and that's not possible on a truck.
The animal rights activists follow the truck day and night. We've been able to talk to the driver, and it's clear he's driving Lithuanian calves via Poland to Spain. We're trying to stop him now with the police after he crossed the border, to take a look at the calves. In Germany, the police follow the transport. They lead the truck out to a motorway service area and inform the veterinary office controller. The animal rights activist Iris Baumgärtner accompanied the transport.
By law, after 9 hours, calves need to be taken care of. The van was already 12 or 13 hours on the road and had, I think, another 1,200 kilometers ahead to France, to an unloading station. So the police did not let them continue because the law says the calves have to be taken care of.
With difficulty, a farm is found that is ready to temporarily house the many calves, because there is no supply station anywhere nearby. They are rare, not only in Germany.
This is a big problem for the police, and even the veterinarians who control animal transports often cannot implement the law or do anything for the animals because there are too few unloading options.
Over 3,000 kilometers of transport across Europe, and even a single traffic jam can cause a delay that means a supply station is not reached on time. The effort to accommodate these calves spontaneously on a farm near the highway is enormous. It takes half the night until the calves are fed with milk substitute food. Transporters with such young calves would have to repeat this procedure every 9 hours. But
this is rarely the case. Some transporters do that, especially German companies, but most of them drive through without stopping.
The next day, another transport. The same problem. Thousands of calves traveling every day across Europe. But at least in Germany, they do spot checks. In France, the police inspect animal transports too. The load on this truck is more calves for fattening up. Some of these milk calves are not up to the stress of a long journey. And this is just the beginning.
They go to countries where the fattening up is cheap. Then they're usually exported further from there.
After being fattened up, the path leads to a slaughterhouse or to export. From Germany alone, exports of live cattle to third countries doubled from 2013 to 2016 to over 70,000 animals. A main buyer, Turkey. A transport from Germany to Turkey takes about 70 hours on average. From the Baltic, it is more than 4,000 kilometers. The animals come from across the EU. Exports from the EU to Turkey rose from 24,000 cattle in 2013 to over 265,000 in 2016. The main border crossing into Turkey is Kapitan Andrejevo in Bulgaria. From here, cattle and sheep leave the European Union. Between June and September, there are often temperatures of between 35 and 40 degrees Celsius. Summer 2017. We accompany employees of the Animal Welfare Foundation to the border.
We're just at the Bulgarian border, Kapitan Andrejevo. This is the border through which animal transports from different EU countries must pass in order to enter Turkey. We've been watching these transports since 2010. The problems have remained the same. What has changed, thank God, is that the transporters are much better.
Was sich Gott sei Dank verändert hat, ist, dass die Transporteure besser sind.
Trucks, for example, have continued to improve in the EU in recent years. Ventilation systems are standard. Drinking systems are on board, which can be put into operation at a stop. Well, there are hauliers who've invested a lot in better transport conditions for the animals, that's quite clear. But all of this can be in vain. Like here, in some weeks during the summer. If you go to the Turkish border Capicule between June and August or September, then you see there are many transports from all over Europe, including Germany, with animals who are suffering extremely because of these very high temperatures. The animals are there in a traffic jam, sometimes for days. They're not processed in time. And regularly, over 6 years, we've documented dying animals, animals dying of thirst, injured animals, and others giving birth on these transports to the external EU countries. Inspections, as in previous years. Over a week in August, these animal rights activists document how the animals at the border are treated. They make accurate records. As in previous years, the result of these few days is more than disappointing. The weekend is coming. The processing to enter Turkey is torturously slow. At night, the temperatures are bearable, but not during the day. Days go by. The animals are stuck in traffic for days and nights, sheep as well as cattle. These are cows from Bavaria in Germany. The water tanks on the trucks have long been empty. An option to refill them is not even possible here in the traffic jam. All vents are running at full speed, but even that brings little relief. More and more, there are dead animals. Injuries are the result where there is thirst and heat and no possibility of escape. Dying animals. Even this magnificent bull does not survive. An unbearable situation for animals and humans.
Many drivers are also extremely angry that the transports to Turkey operate so badly, and that hasn't changed in years.
This driver has been waiting 3 days in the boiling heat because of bureaucracy. An ear tag did not match the papers. He is beside himself. He yells that for 3 days he's been unable to give his animals any food or water.
Many say it's horrible for them to drive animal transports to Turkey.
Some veterinary offices in Germany do not approve any transports to Turkey during these hot summer weeks. There, however, the demand is particularly high, with the upcoming Islamic Festival of Sacrifice. Tuesday, the 15th of August. cattle from the south of Germany are in the queue in front of the EU border. Germany exports many pregnant cattle for milk production in Turkey.
Of course, there are also animal transporters who do it legally, and drivers who really try everything to ensure that the animals are doing well on the way. But as you have seen, when they drive to the border in Turkey, it is 40 degrees Celsius, there's no shade, and they have to wait several hours, sometimes several days. There's nothing they can do to ensure the protection of the animals and the supply.
Da kann man einfach nichts mehr machen, den Schutz der Tiere zu gewährleisten und die Versorgung.
A brochure from the EU provides advice. It is entitled, "Transporting Live Animals to Turkey." If so, says the brochure, among other things, ensure good ventilation, not over 30 degrees, and be prepared for the unexpected. We ask the EU in Brussels, how can it be that every summer from the EU border to Turkey, animals are suffering and dying of thirst for so many years?
We were asking about the situation at the border between Bulgaria and Turkey. So we are working with Bulgaria, for example, to see how we can improve the facilities that they have for animals close to the border. And we are working with Turkey to make sure that such problems at the border are reduced or don't occur in the future anymore. So we are working with them to try to improve the situation and avoid this kind of unforeseen situation. Temperature, for example, is another unforeseen event, unforeseen situation.
Unpredictable temperatures, kilometers of traffic jams. Not every week looks like this, but every summer it happens all over again. We've been here before. A few weeks ago, the same conditions. Almost endless queues, truck traffic jams, a test of nerves for the drivers, animals that are almost dying of thirst until they finally pass the EU's external border to Turkey. The transport journey is far from over, but at this external border of the EU, animal welfare ends, especially during these weeks in summer. This animal will die beyond the border. According to the judgment of the European Court of Justice, EU animal welfare rules are also valid in Turkey. However, no one cares anymore.
It's just madness to transport animals over thousands of kilometers and into countries where there is no law that protects them.
Some transports go from here far into Iraq, another 2,215 kilometers to Erbil. But most animals stay somewhere in Turkey, in a dairy farm, in a feedlot, or sent to a slaughterhouse. No law can protect them there. Amsterdam. Several times, the organization Eyes on Animals has tracked the fates of animals from the border to the slaughterhouses. Leslie Moffat has often been to Turkey herself. The organization also offers training there for slaughterhouses.
I drive there between 3 and 4 times a year. We were just there in July. One team was in the slaughterhouses, that was my team, and one team was at the border to inspect the animal transport.
Leslie Moffat has visited Turkish slaughterhouses for years. The journey ends here for many sheep and cattle. After all the hardship, their deaths are horrific.
Basically, there are still huge problems in the slaughterhouses in Turkey, the same as in 2013. And that's because there's no law in Turkey, no animal welfare law at slaughter.
In Turkey, they slaughter according to Islamic rite. the so-called halal slaughter. That means without previous stunning. For a long time, animal rights activists have condemned the way this killing is done in many Turkish slaughterhouses.
The butcher has a very short knife, not big enough to sever the neck in one cut. And actually, halal means to cut the whole neck at once, to let the blood out of the animal. But look how many times he must stab. Imagine how much pain it brings to the animal. He's still alive. He's still aware of that. You can see that in his eyes.
This man has intensively studied the mandates of the Karremann in relation to animals. He is a Muslim himself and works as an inspector for eyes on animals on a voluntary basis.
Schlachthöfe in der Türkei, die müssen sich sehr...
Slaughterhouses in Turkey have to change a lot, because what you see there is not really an Islamic rule, it's just torture for the animals. And people do that because they think that's Islamic, and that has to be. No, that does not have to be. Why do we use technology for our own body and not for the animals? When we are operated on, we use anesthesia. And if we slaughter an animal, we should also use anesthesia. In this case, bolt shot.
Wir sollten auch die Narkose verwenden. In diesem Fall Bolzenschuss.
But using anesthesia before slaughter is still a long way off in Turkey. More than once, Leslie Moffat has witnessed the horrific ways in which animals are being killed after their live transport journeys.
After this very bad slaughterhouse in Turkey, I couldn't sleep for 3 weeks because all I could hear was the sound of the bull screaming.
One could also export meat instead of live animals. But there is a desire in Islamic countries to slaughter the animals after their rites. However, that's just one reason for live animal exports, and not the only one.
Es ist billiger. Es ist schlicht und ergreifend für die Exporteure.
It's cheaper. It's simply cheaper for the exporters to transport a living animal according to today's standards, which run just as uncontrolled as we've just investigated. A closed cooling chain would be extremely expensive. You need completely different vehicles, different ships. The other reason is that there's also a need in the countries to slaughter by their own ways, their own methods, and market the animals.
Die Tiere zu schlachten und zu vermarkten.
For many animals, this means that a truck transport is followed by being loaded onto a ship to Lebanon or North Africa. We decide to observe shipments in an EU port in Croatia, unnoticed. There are modern trucks that deliver here. There is even a large stable, only it's not always used. Most of the trucks we watch load animals directly onto the ships. This saves money for the stable, because the time spent on the ship is not considered transport. It's categorized as rest. Animals leave the European Union by being herded onto a ship. The level of information on the condition of the animals, their whereabouts, on the method of onward transport ceases at the EU's external border. So unloading at the EU's external border onto a ship puts a stop to knowledge about the animals. But what about the animal protection? Are the EU rules only valid until they leave the Union, or do they continue to be binding up to the destination of the live transport journey? This was argued in courts for many years, right up to the European Court of Justice. The trigger was the decision of a veterinarian in the south of Germany. Official veterinarians must approve every animal transport. For this purpose, an exporter must submit a transport plan first. The plan details the care and rest periods of the animals on the way, too. An exporter requested the transport of breeding cattle to Uzbekistan with this veterinarian.
To prepare at work, I try to understand how long it takes to go from Kempten to Uzbekistan. And according to the checkpoints that were entered into the transportation plan, we came to a distance of nearly 7,000 kilometers.
The transport would be mainly through Asia. 6 days without unloading the animals from the truck, against EU regulations, which require bovines to disembark every 29 hours. The veterinarian gets advice from the legal office of the city.
And for us, this raised a major question. How can it be that a transport journey where a major part of the route effectively plans to disobey the EU has this stamp of approval to proceed from an EU member state?
The official veterinarian does not release the transport. The export company goes to court against this decision.
Because they were convinced that the power of an official veterinarian in Germany ends at the EU's external border. And I just didn't see it that way, because my signature is valid until the final destination of a transport.
A German company exporting cattle for breeding applied for the transport and stick to their opinion. They want to clarify the question. Why did we argue that? The veterinary office has simply refused to handle transports that are planned to obey the European laws only within Europe. So, we had to make the decision either not to load there in future or to decide judicially. That was the reason why it went to court, and we brought it to the European Court of Justice. We argued that European law applies to Europe, or just applies to the EU, but not in third countries. We ultimately lost to the European Court of Justice. The decision of the European Court of Justice is clear. EU animal welfare rules apply to the whole transport up to the final destination, even if that is, for example, in Turkey, Lebanon, or Egypt.
When the transport starts in a member state, normally it's the member states and the authorities and the transporters which have to make sure that the transport goes as foreseen and within the legislation, and that it enjoys the animal welfare rules. But indeed, the third countries are not bound by EU legislation rules.
But how should a transporter guarantee animal welfare outside the EU?
Ich weiß bis heute nicht, wer Russland, Kasachstan, Usbekistan.
I still don't know who informed Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, whichever country you mention, that their transport and animal welfare guidelines, if they have any, are not valid for our trucks, but our guidelines are. And that's what they have to teach a different state. That's why I think the judgment of the European Court is hair-raising.
Das Urteil, das EuGH-Urteil auch haarsträubend.
Nevertheless, a judgment that applies not only to the export of expensive breeding animals, as his company Zuchtvieh Export transports them, but also to slaughter cattle, sheep as well as cattle.
Tierschutz ist Tierschutz, unabhängig vom Tier.
Animal welfare is animal welfare, regardless of the animal. This is undisputed. It's not in question. However, it may be necessary to keep in mind that the use of the animal is completely different in the breeding animals compared to the slaughter animals. You can imagine that as if you're selling cars. If you sell a Formula One car, which you plan to take place in a race somewhere, the Formula One car must arrive flawless. If you sell junk cars that are being exploited, it's not that important if the body has one bump more or less. That's how I describe it. Honest words from an expert in this industry, even if he does not deal with animals bound for slaughterhouses himself. 650,000 cattle were exported from the EU to third countries from January to August 2017, more than twice as many as in 2014. June 2017. It's morning at the port of Beirut, Lebanon. The Britta car has entered and is unloading. For about a week, the vessel was on its way. It was loaded in Sète, a port near Marseille in France. The cargo are sheep and cattle from Europe. We're watching secretly. What are conditions like nowadays for animals sent from the EU to Lebanon? On all previous visits, the unloading was anything but animal-friendly. Review 1994. This is what the discharge looked like at that time. Over and over again, injured animals, with broken legs or hips. With the use of a crane, they are pulled out of the lower hold of the freighter. Hung on one leg. The leg breaks during this procedure due to the animal's weight. Even then, the politicians in Germany and the EU were talking about these incidents as exceptions. In fact, this method of bringing injured animals to the slaughterhouse was commonplace. These and other pictures of transports we documented triggered protests. There were demonstrations in Germany and throughout Europe. Individual cases are established by the EU Commission in Brussels. 1996, back at the port of Beirut. Again, injured animals arrive on the ships regularly. Animals from all over Europe. At that time, the export of cattle was still subsidized, meaning the EU paid high premiums for export. Injured animals are still not anesthetized on the ship or killed for relief. They're unloaded with the ship's crane. The animals that are alive can still be sold and slaughtered. It's about the money. (2005). The same pictures. Once again, injured cattle are hoisted out of a ship by rope winch, loaded onto trucks and carted to slaughterhouses. Shortly thereafter, the EU deletes all subsidies for the export of slaughter animals and imposes stricter animal welfare rules on transport. (2017). Cattle and sheep were unloaded from the ship Britannia. Only one truck is left. What comes next, in 2017, violates everything that EU animal welfare law requires. This is no exception. Even from this ship, we documented it at 2 discharges coming from France in summer 2017. This animal will be transported even further from the harbour. It has been 2 years since the European Court of Justice decided animal welfare does not end at the Union border. The EU's rules are valid until the final destination. This has not yet been reached. Also, the instance before the European Court, the Bavarian Administrative Court, judged the Member States and the Union must fully take into account the welfare needs of animals as sentient beings. The buyers of the animals probably know nothing of all of this. At all events, these German sheep have a painful transport behind them. The people here have their own well-tried methods to transport and load animals. Once exported, the animals are at the mercy of arbitrariness. Torture, such as eye gouging, was not observed everywhere in a study carried out by Animals International in Lebanon, but that does not make it any better for the animals affected. Back in Germany, we would like to know, what does the story of cattle look like from beginning to end? A so-called dairy farm. That means calves are constantly born here, because without calves, there is no milk. Here, all cattle are known by name.
This is a cow, and she'll have her first calf in about a month. Her name is Rosalie.
The animals are doing fine. Every effort is made to keep things that way.
Our animals are not anonymous. They're kept in an appropriate manner, and we know all of our animals by name. This is our oldest lady with 12 calves, and she's actually still quite fit. She would have to be around 14 years of age by now.
As on every farm that produces milk, most male calves are sold and go through cattle dealers to be fattened up elsewhere. Two days after Christmas, in December 2015, a calf was born here in the Bavarian forest whose path we follow until 2017, when it reappears in Egypt. The offspring of a dairy cow was sold as usual to a cattle dealer in the spring of 2016. The cattle dealer resold the calf near Münster in northwest Germany. There, it went through several fattening companies. Barely half a year later, in July 2016, the company Westfleisch exported the animal for further fattening to Hungary. Therefore, the animal was sold to Hungary on July 12, 2016, as part of an export business. After that, it can no longer be traced. Delivery of the animal on the 12th of July 2016 ends the possibility of tracing for us, it says in a letter from the company. A request in Hungary remains without answer. At some point, the animal must have been loaded onto a ship destined for Egypt. In the summer of 2017, employees of the organization Animals International check slaughterhouses in Egypt. Hundreds of sheep and cattle are delivered here at the slaughterhouse area near Cairo every day. Strange methods are found in all farms examined. For example, here they cut through the animal's leg tendons before they're driven into the slaughterhouse. The consequence, of course, is that the animals can no longer walk, but they should be able to. The brutality does not make sense. Everything is reminiscent of a bullfight in Spain. In addition, the investigative images, most of which we cannot show, demonstrate yet another common practice. Almost all of the animal's eyes are gouged out. The end of an animal transport. Short episodes from everyday torture. Sometimes it takes up to half an hour for an animal to finally die. And these are certainly not individual cases.
It's not an exception. We are talking about the phenomenon. No matter if it's an approved slaughterhouse of the state or if it's happening in the street. This is a phenomenon, and everything that we see there would be completely illegal in Germany or anywhere in Europe.
But Europe is far away. This cow comes from Germany. The ear tag proves its origin. This is the calf whose trail we lost in Hungary. With the footage, we visit the family business in Bavaria where the animal was born. We show them the conditions in the destination country, some scenes from the last part of their animal's life. Amazement that the animal is in Egypt, and disbelief at how it is being treated there.
So this is the stepsister of the butchered bull we saw earlier on the video. We didn't know that the animals we sell for fattening and raise as humanely as possible, doing everything we can to make them feel well, die so cruelly.
An animal that they raised with love and care being killed 1,000 kilometers away overseas in a way that shocked him and his entire family, up to the fact that most of the members of the family could not look anymore, and they were angry, and I can understand they are angry because they didn't know.
And my heart hurts when I see that our bull, which we have raised on our farm, had such a fate. That hurts in the heart.
Many of the cattle that are ultimately exported originally come from dairy farms. Most of them are male progeny of cows reared for high milk yield. Once it is sold, no farmer knows what happens to his animal afterwards. With Gerrit from Animals International, we're on our way to visit farmers in France.
Okay.
An ear tag in a slaughterhouse in Morocco told us one cow killed there lived in this agricultural cooperative near Lyon beforehand. It was sold and exported pregnant.
This is what happened to the cow. If you want to see, please.
Yeah?
Gerrit from Animals International shows the farmers what happened to their animal in the end. It is not as cruel as in Egypt, but still slaughter without prior stunning.
It's awful, yeah. But I don't know what I can say. I don't know. We buy some little cows when they're, I don't know, 1 year, one or 2 years, and for them they go to Morocco to make a baby, to make milk, and after we don't know what they make with them. We don't know.
Next, we want to meet the farmer where the cow was born. It's a dairy farm too, a family business, like the one before in Bavaria, in Germany. The farmer gives us a friendly welcome. He's interested in finding out what happened to the cow he sold as a calf. It's much more barbaric there than in France. Here, animals are stunned before being killed. Then they don't suffer anymore. But the problem is, how can we change their methods? We dairy farmers, of course, we want the lives of our cows to go on and end in a good manner. But to change their methods, what can we do? Once we've sold the animals, we have no influence over what happens then. It's a problem of halal slaughter too, of course. If that happens in this way, I prefer to export meat instead of live animals. Then we could avoid the stress of a transport and avoid them being killed in this unreasonable way. In France and in Europe in general, there are laws about how an animal has to be slaughtered in the most humane way. One should export animals live only if they're meant to give milk. But for meat, they should be slaughtered here before being exported. It is often claimed that animals for slaughter need to be exported live, because clients in Islamic countries want to slaughter according to their own ritual, called halal. But cruelty towards animals is not part of halal.
Weil der Prophet gesagt hat,
because the Prophet said, "Do not harm any animal." The animal should be slaughtered without pain if that is possible. Simply put, people are slaughtering the animals according to the customs they've seen before. Kosher butchering means slaughter without anesthetic. Halal means to follow an Islamic rite. By a single cut through the throat, the animal should die immediately without suffering. But this is not the case here in Egypt. Quite the contrary.
Man schlachtet so, was man von seinen Vorfahren gesehen hat.
You slaughter the way your ancestors showed you, and people justify that as Islamic. But it's not. You do what your father told you.
Man macht das, was man von Vater gesehen hat.
Role models. In Egyptian slaughterhouses, many children watch the unbelievable violence against animals. The next generation becomes used to the incredible brutality against these animals from all over the world. Love for animals is driven out of these children. This leaves no hope of a better fate for our animals in the near future. For decades, nothing has changed in the destination countries of animal transport.
I think that it is ethically unacceptable to send animals over thousands of miles to countries where it is likely that they are being slaughtered under the cruelest conditions. I think it's completely unnecessary.
For decades, millions of cattle and sheep have been sent to North Africa and the Middle East, coming from all over the world. It seems to be a never-ending need, and a never-changing cruelty towards animals. A sheep market in Jordan. The live animals were treated as goods. After a transport lasting weeks, the peaceful animals face thoughtless torture and a painful death at the end. Gabriel Paun watched such cruelty in several countries in the Middle East. Sheep often even come from as far as Australia, just to be killed in the Middle East. 9,000 to 10,000 kilometers transport on ships like this one. For the first time, there are insights available.
This vision is a world first. It's for the first time where several journeys are being documented in such a detail. The journey started in Australia and ended in the Persian Gulf, and it usually lasts at least 3 weeks.
A part of the animals even came from South Australia. Tens of thousands of sheep are packed on several decks, so closely that they cannot even lie down and rest during the entire journey. For the same reason, a proportion of sheep do not have access to food or water. They die, although there is a veterinarian on board.
This is what the industry claims is the world's best standards. They would say this is the top of the world. They even have a welfare commitment which says no fear, no pain.
Lambs are born during the long journeys. They have no chance of survival.
Quite a number of babies being born and dying soon after that, either because they were already sick, or their parents were sick or unable to feed them.
Hundreds of sheep died excruciating deaths on every one of the 5 documented transports. In one case, even many more.
Here we see some vision of the Voyage 25 is one of the 5 we have been obtaining vision between May and November last year. It's a journey where at least 2,400 animals died because of heat stress and lack of medical attention.
unbelievable suffering. Minutes become hours for these animals.
The 5 journeys that we have been documented in this case, we have evidence that at least 4,000 animals died. In one of the journeys, even 2,400. But the real number of animals that passed away, it's never known, because in many cases the animals don't make it to the destination. They are being thrown overboard. Wherever the crew has access to the decks, to the dead animals, and they see one, they would throw them over the board. There were situations where we have seen workers throwing overboard animals who were not dead yet. They were still alive. Not a single journey that we documented was an exception. This is business as usual. This is the evidence of systematic failure to ensure law enforcement or any standard.
No adequate animal welfare standard at all. No care for the environment. Thousands of dead animals are thrown into the ocean every year. Manure is dumped. More than 2 million sheep died over the past 30 years on their way from Australia to faraway slaughterhouses. And the count continues. Is livestock transport up to date? Indeed, was it ever?
We live
in the 21st century. I cannot understand that we still must transport animals over thousands of miles only to be slaughtered at the end of the journey.
In the end, it doesn't matter whether animals come from Europe or elsewhere. Within the EU, a lot has improved in animal transport. Outside the EU, the judgment of the European Court of Justice provides no protection for the animals against pain and suffering. Nor does any Australian no fear, no pain standard. Of course, someone is responsible for every transport, and the lives of animals are hugely impacted by religious beliefs. Perhaps religious institutions should become far more deeply involved, because animals are sentient beings, just like humans.